In this video, I'm going to give you guys 7 motorcycles that I think are the best sounding bikes of all time. There are so many great sounding motorcycles and it was very hard to make this list, but I think I've narrowed it down to 7 bikes that I would choose for this video. Now these bikes are in no particular order, but coming in at number 7 is the Yamaha R1. Yamaha makes musical instruments. Yamaha is known for their sound engineering, and they are known for one of the greatest sounding cars of all time, the Lexus LFA. Even though this was a Lexus product, Yamaha was directly responsible for the exhaust note, and many people have tried changing it to no success. Yamaha knows what they're doing, and the Yamaha R1 is no exception. It has a distinct scream that no other leader bike has, thanks to its cross-plane crank and its firing order. The Yamaha R1 definitely deserves a spot on the best sounding motorcycle of all time. Coming in at number 6 is the Honda VFR 800. The Honda VFR in the early days, all of the early generation bikes had something called cam-driven gears. My RC51 has the same thing. It sounds like the bike is supercharged. They make this super unique chatter that is just so intoxicating to listen to. When I bought my RC51, I simply just could not get off the bike because of that insane mechanical noise when riding the machine. Cam-driven gears alone make the VFR deserve this spot right here. But it gets even better because the RC51 is a V-twin. VFR is a V-four. The V-four on its own, however, has a very exotic and muscly note. And then you put cam-driven gears on top of that exotic V4 noise, it just becomes an absolute orchestra when you're riding the machine. One day, someday, I hope I can add a VFR to the collection, and I know it's going to be absolutely irresistible to hop onto that machine with a proper exhaust and the cam-driven gears. Now speaking of mechanical noises, the next bike on this list is the Triumph Daytona 675. The Daytona has an inline 3-cylinder. That inline 3 has a very distinct note. You can't really compare it to an inline 4 until you start to get it into the RPM band, which then it screams like an inline 4. Now the triple sounds amazing, but that's not enough for this bike to come onto the best sounding motorcycles of all time. The reason why I select this bike for the list is because it has straight cut gears. If you've ever watched in-cabin footage of any Le Mans car or any race car, you basically hear this whining noise that comes from the transmission. The reason why you hear that whining noise is because how the gears are set up. In the Triumph Daytona, it has the exact same setup called straight cut gears, which when you ride the motorcycle and get it into load, the Triumph Daytona 675 has this insane transmission whine, which is everything any racer boy could ever imagine. Now when you have a race car, basically the only thing you hear from inside of the cabin is the gears. Before a motorcycle, you're sitting outside of the bike, you're hearing this straight cut gear system on top of an inline 3-cylinder absolutely screaming. I don't think it can get much better than that. But it can with this next bike. Now the next bike on this list is a 2-stroke. To not have a 2-stroke would basically be a crime to humanity. Now when it comes to 2-strokes, there are some insane 2-stroke engines out there. The Water Buffalo with an inline 3-cylinder, Kawasaki screaming air-cooled 3-cylinders. There's a Square 4 2-stroke. A Square 4. Yeah, what was Suzuki thinking? And then there's also a V4 two-stroke. But when it comes to sound, the simplicity and the intoxication factor of having a parallel twin, not many engines can come close to that. And that's why my choice is the RD350. The RD350 with proper chambers sounds fantastic. Even though Kawasaki's triples and all of that, the engineering behind them, power band, everything is so crazy. The simple sound factor of the RD350 makes it an absolute legendary bike. Now again, there's some amazing two-strokes of the day, but when it comes to the RD350, it's easily one of my top choices for best sounding bikes of all time. Now I'm lucky and fortunate and slightly biased because I do own one of these bikes, but then again, I still would choose this well before I ever bought it. We can debate two-strokes all day, but this is my choice, and if you disagree, well, you're wrong. Now before we get into the top 3, I want to remind you that over 40% of you that are returning to my videos are not subscribed. So please do me a huge favor, go down and hit that subscribe button because it helps the channel more than you can even imagine. Now coming at number 3 is the Honda CBR 250RR, the highest revving motorcycle of all time with a 254 cylinder. The 250RR started production in '86 and it revved out to nearly 20,000 RPM. There are very few of these bikes left, and in America they are basically non-existing. Now most of you have probably never experienced 20,000 RPM on a bike, but for those who have not experienced even 15,000 RPM, let me tell you a little bit of what my first time riding a bike like that was. Now usually when I ride a bike, I stay between 3,000 and 5,000 RPM. I was riding this R6, make sure there was nothing wrong with it before I purchased it, and I was like, this bike doesn't have any power. Now I look down at the RPM gauge and I say, oh, I have 10,000 more RPMs to go. I'm only at 6,500. Now imagine you're at 10,000 RPM and you still have another 10,000 more to go. I'm gonna quit talking and just let you guys hear what 20,000 RPM sounds like. Now moving on to number 2, I have the MV Agusta F4, an inline 4-cylinder that's either a 750 or a liter. The early designs of the MV Agusta inline 4 actually came from Ferrari. The MV Agusta, when fired up, roars into life and it sounds absolutely crazy. And then you rev it up and it screams. The F4 just, I have no words to put how good this bike sounds. Now at this point you can probably click off the video because you already know what my top choice is going to be, and if you don't, it's the Honda CBX. Inline 6-cylinder with 6 carburetors. Now there's a story of the CBX that I think is very important, and it's actually the reason why it doesn't sound the greatest from the factory. If you know anything about Honda, they produce very restrictive motorcycles from the factory. A lot of the bikes you have to modify them and open them up, and pretty much now every modern day bike is very similar to that aspect. The designers of the CBX actually sat at the Japanese military base and watched fighter jets take off. They tried to replicate this noise and allegedly they did it pretty perfectly. But unfortunately Honda didn't want to engineer a motorcycle that sounded like machines of war. So thus they changed the exhaust of the CBX, and what it was supposed to sound like the world will probably never know. Now from the factory the CBX is restricted, but it still sounds good. But when you put a proper exhaust on it, it becomes F1-like. It becomes absolutely this perfect note. Now Kawasaki did make an inline 6-cylinder, but it doesn't compare to the scream and the wail that the CBX makes. Now, the CBX was an exercise of engineering. It was the first motorcycle to produce over 100 horsepower, but a year later, Honda came out with a smaller bike that made more power and was significantly faster. But the engineering behind it and the orchestra that the 6 cylinders makes the CBX one of the most legendary and one of the best sounding motorcycles of all time. If you guys did enjoy this video, please do me a huge favor, leave a like and subscribe to the channel. I'd love to hear your guys' opinions on the best sounding motorcycles of all time. At the end of the day, it comes down to a very subjective point of view because there's no way to quantify sound. You know, some people might prefer the thump of the old British bikes, some people might prefer the scream of the newer bikes. When it comes to myself, I like both, I love both, but when it comes to this mechanical sound, it's pretty hard to argue with that.